Welcome to our session focused on peer support arrangements, an evidence-based approach for promoting social connections and learning among students with autism, with intellectual disability, and other developmental disabilities. But this is also a practical strategy for supporting general education inclusion. Well, including students with disabilities well in academic and elective classrooms can sometimes feel challenging. There's often this tension that we feel between these two goals that, sometimes feel competing. The goal of making sure our students are accessing rigorous instruction and the goal of fostering meaningful relationships. Between making sure students have the very best academic support so that progress can be made on a challenging curriculum and making sure they have the best social supports that lead to rich interactions and new friendships. Is it rigor or is it relationships? And does one really have to at all come at the expense of the other? Well, this shouldn't be considered an either-or decision. It's a both-and investment. When we turn that single access into a double access or a plane, what we see is our work is a double pursuit. We don't focus more on academics and little on social relationships, as this star indicates, or more on social relationships and relatively little on academics, as this star indicates. Now, we strive to advance both together. To be in the spot where learning and relationships go hand in hand, this is where peer support arrangements hold such promise. To elevate outcomes in both areas by engaging fellow classmates and providing some of the support a student might need. So at the end of the session, you'll be able to describe peer support arrangements in an easy to understand and practical way. You'll be able to explain the key components of this research-based support model. You'll understand the potential benefits of this approach for everyone involved and learn about additional resources that can help you if you decide to implement this intervention at your school. And this is an approach that embeds really well in your peer-to-peer program at your school when you're trying to support students more meaningfully in general education classrooms. So what are peer support arrangements? Well, they involve equipping and supporting peers to provide ongoing social, behavioral, or academic support to a student with disabilities within inclusive classrooms. Let me provide just a basic overview to get us started. Basically, one or two peer partners are identified and invited from in the same classroom, and then they attend an initial orientation session focused on practical and appropriate ways they can support their classmate in the variety of large and small group activities that make up that class. So as the students work together throughout the semester, they end up receiving ongoing guidance and facilitation from a paraprofessional or a special educator or a related services provider. Those staff, though, gradually fade back their direct support as the students gain experience and confidence working together more independently. Staff, of course, keep track of academic and social progress of all the students so they can make necessary changes along the way. And these interventions are often used as an alternative to that exclusive reliance on one-to-one paraprofessional support models that we see used so widely for students with extensive support needs. So some of the goals of this approach are to promote students' academic engagement across classroom activities, to help students learn and practice new social and communication skills, to enable them to meet new classmates, and just to increase the number of people to whom students can turn to for needed help or assistance. It raises expectations about what students with disabilities can learn and accomplish, and it diminishes the potential stigma of always having a paraprofessional close by. Now, it's important to emphasize here that peers are classmates, not helpers. They're fellow learners. They're not mini teachers. Now, I'll illustrate this now another way, this time focusing more on the key players. So peer support arrangements are usually designed for a particular student with disabilities, especially those who might have more extensive support needs, who's already attending a general education class. In other words, it's an individualized intervention for a single student rather than focused on multiple students at once. And this approach can be used across the grade span with younger and older students. It can be adapted for students with autism who are doing fine academically, but maybe still struggle socially. Now, the classmates without developmental disabilities who provide support to the student during each of these class periods are usually called peer partners, or that's just a generic word that we use to describe them. Usually 2 or 3 peers are selected, and I'll talk a bit more about who could be invited later on. Now, every peer support arrangement also has an adult facilitator, which is usually a paraprofessional assigned to provide support within that classroom. Often it was a one-to-one support, but it could also be a special educator or a related services provider. And their job is to encourage social connections and shared work with their peer partners to make sure the peer support arrangements are working well, to collect data on academic and social needs, to collaborate with general and special educators to carry out well-planned supports, and to intentionally fade back their direct support so that students are working together more independently. Now, the roles of special educators often include carrying out any relevant assessments, writing the peer support plan, equipping paraprofessionals to support students in more facilitative ways, orienting peer partners to their roles, identifying needed modifications and accommodations, and keeping in regular communication with the facilitator and classroom teacher. General educators also have an important role by helping identify peer partners, assisting in their orientation, and supporting students as they work together collaboratively. But they should also implement good inclusive practices by embedding collaborative learning activities into their class, by collaborating with special educators to provide accommodations and modifications, and guiding paraprofessionals to ensure they're promoting rather than hindering students' social participation and learning. And finally, related service providers can also have an indirect support role. You might have a speech-language pathologist that is identifying critical social and communication skills that could be taught and reinforced by peers. Maybe a PT or an OT who can design supports to ensure that students have access to the materials and technology and activities that make up that class. Or even behavioral specialists who can work with teachers on positive support strategies that might be implemented in the classroom. So how do all of these players work in concert to ensure a vibrant peer support arrangement? Well, I'm going to cover 7 basic steps shown on your screen. Each I'll introduce briefly, but I'll point you to additional readings and resources where you can, of course, go to learn more. So let's start with collaborations. Best practices in inclusive education and special education have always emphasized the importance of collaborative teaming. And this is also the case with peer support arrangements. I've already mentioned a number of those key players and their roles, but engaging the experiences and the perspectives of special educators and paraprofessionals, of general educators, related service providers, school counselors, and families can help you individualize and strengthen this intervention. But they can also ensure that inclusive and effective practices are being implemented well. Maybe you can also think of others at your school who'd really have good insights into this approach. For example, an educational team might work together to identify students' academic and social needs within that general education classroom, to determine individualized intervention goals, to brainstorm ways in which peer partners could support those goals, to develop a written peer support plan, or just to identify strategies for ensuring students and their peer partner would be successful. Well, next, a written plan should be developed that addresses the various ways in which students and their peer partners will work together throughout the semester, as well as the ways in which paraprofessionals and classroom teachers can best support this collaborative arrangement. Now, a variety of planning tools have been used by teachers. However, most tools encourage teams to consider first the different instructional formats that might be used within the class, like whole group discussion or lectures or guest speakers, small group projects, labs, independent work, downtime, whatever it might be. And second, it delineates the ways in which the student with a disability will participate in each of those activities throughout the semester. Third, they address the social and academic supports that will be provided by peer partners. And fourth, they address the ways in which the classroom teacher and paraprofessional will each assist the student. So I'm going to highlight briefly just a few of these variations, and you can pause the screen along the way if you want to take a deeper look into each of these. In this first example, the left row lists each of the different instructional arrangements that often comprise a given class. Things like lectures or small group work, independent work or guest speakers, as well as features like homework and assignments and materials for class. Now, the second column has the title Typical Activities and Routines. Now, you would write down each of the ways the classroom teacher uses these formats. For example, whole group work might include lectures or guest speakers or watching instructional videos or having a class debate. Now, the third column has the title Expectations for All Students. And this is where you list out what students are typically expected to do during each of those activities and routines. In other words, you're addressing how each student participates. And now the fourth column has the title Supports and Adaptations. And here you'd list out the supports that the student with disabilities will need to participate in those activities in expected ways. Now, some of those supports will come from adults, but many or most should come from peer partners and other classmates. Now, this provides just an initial roadmap for establishing those peer support arrangements. And on the screen is an example of a filled-in tool that you could pause, take a closer look at, and will kind of prompt your own imagination here. But there are other ways of formatting a plan. The version here that I've shown, example B, lists the typical class activities that make up the class, with the addition of addressing the very beginning and the very end of class. And those are the times when instruction may not yet or still be underway. And they're also really social components of the class, the beginning and the end. The difference is really found in the next 3 columns. In each, you'd list out ideas for how the student with disabilities will participate in each of those activities. Then you'll list the ways that peer partners could provide support in each of those activities. And finally, you would list the ways in which a paraprofessional or teacher could facilitate participation and the exchange of support. And again, I've put up on your screen an example that you can pause the video on, take a closer look, and it will again spark some ways of thinking about this creatively. Now, a final example places the accent on aligning what students with disabilities do with what their classmates do. Here, the first column is very similar to the last example, but again, the next 3 columns call for different forms of reflection. The second column asks, how do peers interact with one another and participate during that kind of activity? The third column asks, what can the student do to interact with and participate with their peers? And the fourth column asks, what could you do to facilitate the students' interactions and participation? Now, the end result is a set of ideas for how students with disabilities can participate in the ordinary aspects of instruction within a particular classroom. Now, each of those 3 examples I shared are especially helpful for paraprofessionals who so often receive limited guidance on how best to support general education inclusion. And of course, the initial written plan really can and should be updated and adapted throughout the semester as the curriculum changes, as new support needs arise, as the instruction evolves. Well, a third step involves preparing paraprofessionals. General educators and special educators can certainly facilitate peer support arrangements. However, we often see that this responsibility goes to paraprofessionals when they're accompanying students with disabilities to those general education classes. And therefore, the staff really do need training and guidance to carry out this responsibility confidently and also effectively. Such training usually addresses the rationale for establishing peer support arrangements, the basic implementation steps, and examples of strategies for facilitating peer interaction and academic support. Now, you'll learn more about this in another session, but the training typically takes 2 to 3 hours, may be enhanced often by incorporating role play or follow-up coaching in the classroom. And some schools bring all of their inclusion paraprofessionals together for this training, which can be a bit more efficient, but also at the same time can make it harder to individualize to the students that they're supporting in particular. Now, as you might expect, the selection of peer partners can impact the success of the arrangement and the enjoyment that students experience. This is the 4th step. Your team will have to decide how many peers to involve, the attributes they should possess, and the ways that you'd invite their involvement. It's really good to match 2 or 3 peers with each student. Having only 1 peer could leave them feeling a little overwhelmed. Having more than 3 could be disruptive or distracting in most classrooms. And as I mentioned earlier, peer partners usually are students who are already enrolled in the class. But it's also common sometimes to involve other peers who attend the class with the student and are taking that peer-to-peer elective course. So both of those options are available to you. Now, in deciding which peers from a particular class to invite, there are some general qualities to consider. For example, you might notice which peers work well with others, which would serve as a positive model, which display appropriate social skills, which have demonstrated personal interest in the student they'd be supporting, which would benefit socially and academically from serving in this role, and which have good attendance. However, it's important to emphasize that students who are themselves struggling academically or maybe who have more inconsistent attendance can still serve in this role and benefit greatly from their involvement. In other words, students who are themselves at risk for academic or behavioral challenges might have much to contribute. Now, another consideration is whether the peers share interests or experiences that might set the stage for new friendships. And ideally, you're selecting peers who the student wants to get to know and who's well positioned to deliver the key supports that are really outlined in that written plan. Now, invitations to peers can be extended in a variety of ways, each of which also has both strengths and drawbacks. For example, you can ask students with disabilities who they want to work with. You could observe to see which students seem like they would work well together. You could make general announcements about the availability of opportunities to serve in a support role in this class, along with an invitation to learn more by talking with the teacher after class. Or you could ask the classroom teacher for their recommendations. And finally, some educators have adopted peer-mediated approaches for all students in their class. Think about like class-wide peer tutoring, or they've rotated who serves as a peer partner over the course of the semester. Now, when students do say that they want to get involved, you might ask them a few questions to really understand the source of that interest and their expectations. And I put a few guiding questions here up on the screen. What interests you most about becoming a peer partner? How well do you already know the student? What expectations do you have? What do you think it takes to be a good peer partner? Are there aspects of this experience that you're worried about or wondering about? And what questions do you have about this role? And what do you hope to gain from the experience? And you could certainly come up with your own to add to this list or adapt from this list. But once you've settled on the peers, you should hold an initial orientation meeting to prepare them for their roles and responsibilities and to address their questions. This is step 5. And this meeting is usually led by a special educator, or it could be the paraprofessional. It takes about 1 hour. I've seen them held before or after school, during study hall or advisory periods, or even over lunch. The goal is to ensure that everyone is comfortable and confident in their roles. And this will come as second nature to some peer partners, and for others, it's going to be quite new. They'll be excited, but this will be new. So the orientation should clarify the goals of the peer support arrangement. It should provide peer partners with relevant information about their classmates. It should address the expectations related to this role and guide them in which types of supports that they should and they should not provide. Now, a list of topics that may be helpful to address are going to be displayed on this slide, such as the reasons for involving peers in supporting their classmates with disabilities, specific goals associated with the peer support arrangement, information about the strengths and interests and talents and school involvement of their partner with disabilities, the educational goals of the student they're supporting described in ways that don't breach confidentiality, the importance of maintaining privacy and using respectful language, and of course, basic instructional and support strategies like modeling and reinforcing and prompting and constructive feedback. Now, of course, the overall emphasis is on teaching peer partners strategies for supporting the communication, the social participation, and the academic engagement of their classmate, and also for sharing how the paraprofessional and teacher can support those students along the way. Now, some of the other topics that might get addressed are things like strategies for interacting with someone who uses assistive technology or an AAC device. You might share ideas for motivating and encouraging their partner, ideas for increasing interactions between the student and other classmates, or even guidance on when to seek assistance from educators and paraprofessionals. And of course, if there are any other responsibilities or expectations that are specific to their roles in that classroom, you're going to want to address those as well. So as the students begin working together, peer partners provide a variety of supports in ways that reflect the role of classmate rather than the role as tutor or of mini-teacher. So throughout the semester, the students sit next to their peer partners and they work collaboratively with them on various class activities, as you've outlined in that written plan. So during the first couple of weeks, the paraprofessional might remain nearby the students, kind of modeling the strategies outlined on the plan, answering peer partners' questions, and just encouraging them. But gradually, the peers assume a more prominent and independent role in assisting the student academically and socially, just as they might do for any of their other classmates. For example, peer partners might share their materials or restate a key idea in a more understandable way. They might demonstrate how to complete an activity or collaborate on specific assignments or even just write down an answer the student shared through an AAC device. And of course, other examples of academic supports abound. We've included a few up here on the screen. And again, you can pause the session and go back through each of these 2 slides to read or learn a little bit more. And socially, peer partners might encourage the student to contribute to group or class discussions, to converse about shared interests while waiting for class to start, to introduce the student to other classmates or reinforce appropriate use of an AAC device. They might model how to respond to a question or just walk to the next class together. And again, other examples are up on the screen. This is not designed to limit your thinking, but really to just spark your creativity and imagination about what kinds of supports students might exchange. Now, the paraprofessional should also be involved in monitoring the arrangement. For example, they might ask as they're observing, are the students seated next to their peer partners? Do they have the same materials as their classmates? Are the students and their peer partners actively engaged in ongoing instruction? Is the work the students doing closely aligned with the work expected of the rest of the class? And are interactions among the student and peers appropriate to the context and the types of interactions that other classmates are having as well? Are students completing class activities at a reasonable pace? And do the student and peer partners appear to be enjoying working together? And of course, there's others you could add to this list of things you might observe. These are just kind of indicators of implementation fidelity. Now, as the group of students gains experience working together and they become more familiar with one another, the paraprofessional systematically fades back their close proximity and support of the students. So rather than serving as the primary or exclusive source of support, they shift to a more facilitative role. So the goal here is really to fade back that support that's in a way shown that I'm going to show on the screen here. So ask yourself, can the student do each class activity on their own? Or if given the right technology or adaptive equipment, if provided with some additional skill instruction, if taught self-management strategies. Now, if the answer is no, then start to think about how a peer partner or a classmate might assist. And if that's not sufficient, then, and really only then, consider how an adult would need to be available to provide occasional or ongoing support. The idea is really to work from the top down rather than assuming you need to start at the bottom and work your way up. So ongoing evaluation really helps the team determine whether peer support arrangements are working as intended or whether they need some refinement. This is step 7. A data-driven approach that incorporates both summative and formative data can provide helpful insights into the implementation and the impact of peer support arrangements. You definitely want to speak to the difference this approach is making for everyone who's involved. Now, observations may be the most objective approach for capturing the impact on participating students. So you'll want to better understand the academic and social impact for students and their peer partners alike. For example, paraprofessionals could collect information on the students' social interactions. For example, their frequency, their appropriateness, their reciprocity, their quality, and also their communication device use, their social skills, their academic engagement, their class participation, and for students with disabilities, their individualized educational goal progress. Check out the peer-to-peer innovation and impact tools and other resources on the START project website where you'll find more ideas for evaluation as well. So conversations with participants is another way to understand their experiences and their outcomes and their recommendations. And there are several people who might be asked to share their insights. For example, students with disabilities could be asked about their experiences receiving support from peer partners, whether they enjoy spending time with these classmates, and if they would like to continue receiving support from them. And peer partners could be asked about the nature of their relationships with their classmate, about the strategies they feel are working well or not so well, about the ways they're personally benefiting from their involvement, and any additional information or assistance that would be potentially helpful. And of course, teachers and paraprofessionals could also be asked about the ways in which peer support arrangements are impacting students and peers, about the extent to which the intervention really fits well within their classroom. And you want to solicit their ideas for better ways of better supporting the student in class. And of course, there may be other perspectives to invite, such as related service providers or others who've been part of that classroom. And of course, you're going to need to adapt your questions so that peer partners, and particularly students with complex communication needs, can best understand. Well, I hope you are intrigued by this approach and that you see how it might fit within a classroom or amidst your overall peer-to-peer program. So let me just offer a few final closing thoughts. Start small, learn the approach, and then begin to expand more broadly. And find key allies among classroom teachers and paraprofessionals as you consider where to begin. Make sure to combine peer support arrangements with other recommended inclusive practices, and always collect good data so that you can tell a strong story about the impact that you're seeing. If you want to read more about peer support arrangements, I've placed just a few options up on the screen. And there's also a good practice guide that's available posted on the START website alongside this video. Of course, don't forget that the project website for START is chock full of resources related to supporting relationships and learning for students with disabilities. This is the go-to place if you want to learn more about launching peer-to-peer in your own school. So thank you for being part of this session, as well as for your ongoing investment in helping students with and without disabilities learn together and to learn well together.